Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where two mental health professionals talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist. To support the show, head over to patreon.com/wellnesswithjer. I'm a mental health professional, not a professional podcaster, so any likes and subscribes, reviews, all that stuff is helpful. Back with a local therapist today, someone who's in the Milwaukee area doing some great work that I'm very excited to talk about. I am joined today by Tracy Keller, owner and operator at Firefly Counseling, LLC. Tracy, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I start most of the podcasts with the same question, which is, how did you get into the mental health field?
It's complicated. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to kind of know my background. I'm the first person in my immediate nuclear family to have a 4-year college degree. So figuring out college was like a thing. In high school or maybe more middle school, I totally thought I was going to go to ITT Tech because it was the only school that I was like aware of because of the commercials.
Sure.
But figured out like 4-year college was a thing and that I should probably go. Somehow I got in my brain that I was going to be a dietitian. So I started there. Terrible in chemistry because that is not my strong suit.
I can relate.
And I was like, well, we're going to have to pivot in some way. So started just leaning into things that I thought were interesting or things I was good at. So leaned into art history, but then was like, what do I do with that?
Mm-hmm.
Leaned into teaching because I was like, that could be something I'd be good at. And had like a student teaching experience in the first semester paired with this like literacy in America dialogue class, which was like the coolest class I've ever had. And I was just like, this feels too hard. This feels like there's too much on the line. So now what I do, like mental health, I don't know. Somehow my brain couldn't do that, but can do this. And then I was like, I thought about psychology always, but I figured if chem sucked, I was never going to get through the weed out class of psych stats. So I was like, I'm just going to find something else. So I started a comm degree and leaned heavily into like the interpersonal kind of dynamics of that, which was kind of cool. It's a different side of therapy, I think. And then I was like, you know what, I think I could probably try it at least, let them weed me out if it's going to happen. So finished and got majors in both comm and psych. And then was like, what am I going to do here? So I remember vividly there was a class like research methods, but she was going through the different things you can do with a psychology degree as it pertains to therapy. So like, what's a psychiatrist, what's a psychologist, what's a therapist? I was like, 2 more years before I have to really figure out what I'm doing sounds good. So I decided to look at therapy at that point and really kind of in reflecting, like every kind of move I was making in there had an element that I feel like leads into therapy. So like dietetics, I feel like it's like that counseling piece. Art history brings like that creative side of things. Teaching, sure. I mean, right, that's right there. And communication. So I feel like it all kind of lended itself in a way to it. But it was kind of just this path I was kind of building as I went, I think. And funnily enough too, in like thinking about this question, like I remember when I was in school, my mom had told me randomly, like in like 2nd or 3rd grade, I told her I wanted to be a social worker. I'm not a social worker, but I was like, well, that's interesting because I totally didn't even remember that. So maybe it's been in my head for a minute, but
yeah. What was like grad school and internship in that process? Like when you landed there, is that something that like resonated and felt good then? Or was there still sort of like I got to figure out what I'm doing?
Yeah, it was still a lot of that. So I remember the first like day in orientation, they talked about like the 3,000 hour like internship after you graduate. And I was like, that's a thing? Shoot. Like I'm not prepared and total imposter syndrome of like, what am I doing here? I don't even know the basic things about becoming a therapist. But like found my track, had like a really awesome professor in a specialty that I don't do anymore, but I feel like I found these like mentors throughout my life who have kind of like helped direct me on the path a little bit. So he was really pivotal in like, I don't know, just helping me like build my confidence in that I was supposed to be there and that this was something that I had a talent for. But I started actually in like kid and teens. Like my specialty was like child and adolescents. So I started, my internship was at like a day treatment, which I didn't necessarily want it to be. I thought I wanted to work more with families. I don't work with families now, but I thought I wanted to do that. And ultimately they had like live supervision, which I thought was super awesome. Like the therapists who were there were phenomenal. But I really didn't like the setting. I really didn't appreciate how they were doing the therapy. I didn't necessarily think it was trauma informed. And I kind of just, I don't know, I kind of felt icky after a while of being there and growing a little bit more in the field after I got my 3,000 hours there. So decided to go somewhere and just kind of get an experience of everything getting thrown at me. So I went to like a large healthcare system and saw a little bit of everything, which I think was great at the time because I got a feel for what I want to do. I can't do this. I can't have essential hours. I need to be working and show up as a parent the way I want to. So decided to go off on my own. And also there were like things I couldn't unsee after being in the healthcare system of just like seeing patients as numbers and like feeling like a cow, like, so there's just pieces that I feel like are fundamental that have come out that I really wanted to put forward in my practice of just being so client-centered and so like every decision I feel like goes for my gut and what feels right to me, what feels right to the client, so we can kind of have that good balance. So I feel cared for, but also that I know that everything I'm doing, I'm helping my clients, you know, not my patients in that way.
Yeah, for sure. What was sort of the vibe you got about opening your own practice while you were in school? Was that a thing that was talked about, or was that a thing you sort of had to figure out on your own?
So interestingly enough, my year that I was in my school was the first year that they like opened up this like clinical mental health counseling degree. So before it was like a community mental health thing, it was like 40 some credits. They opened up to have more credits to kind of fit like the accreditation thing they were kind of moving for. So they introduced all these new classes like the last year that I was there. And one of them was a private practice type of class.
Yeah.
All we did was make a business plan.
Sure.
And I remember when I was coming out of the day treatment job, I was like, I could start a private practice now. I just need to make a business plan. So I've like half of a really thoroughly thought out business plan.
Yeah.
That is a bunch of bull crap. Like it's stuff that I'm not, I don't even know if I've looked at it since. So I think as I was starting to build or getting this idea that I wanted to build my own practice, I was fortunate enough to have a friend who's out of state, but we went to grad school together and both didn't have that background. And we really kind of just, you know, did what I do apparently and like figured it out as we went. So she built hers and I built mine kind of together, which was a really amazing experience and a really good bonding dynamic for us. But yeah, no, none. There was maybe like a presenter who talked about private practice, but nope.
I think in grad school, we did like one paper on building your ideal practice, and it was like, don't worry about budget. Just if you could do whatever you wanted, like, and like, you know, we all had these in the wood retreat center, like nature based, like.
Yes. I called mine like safe haven, and it was something like that too.
Yeah. Just totally unrealistic.
Yeah. Amazing though. But, and especially then, coming out and seeing what people can build. That's not that class.
No, not at all. What has your feeling been since opening your own place? Like, what has that felt like for you as a provider, and what have you sort of learned and built your practice into?
So I've learned a lot. I think I've learned a lot about just mental health, which sounds wonky. Like I should have done that in school or before then. But just like, I think I finally had a chance to breathe and really think about clients. And think about me and how I'm showing up with my clients and kind of backing off some of the rules that we got in grad school too about how we're supposed to show up and all that good stuff. But I think it's been really cool. Like, I think I've found in my schooling experience that I really like to learn. So I really like to throw myself at like workshops or seminars or conferences, things like that, just to kind of see what's going on in the field. And I feel like that's really kind of been invaluable too. I'm certified in EMDR, but I like to think that I kind of like play with the idea of EMDR. I also have like training in CPT, and a little bit of somatic work and parts work. But I think that's been so helpful because when in the trauma work I'm doing, I don't believe that one modality fits for everybody. And I think it's a really cool, unique experience, kind of being able to tailor things to whoever's in front of me, and kind of work collaboratively together to see like what's going to feel safest to you, like help empower them through, their trauma, which is usually a situation where they didn't feel power.
Yeah. And that like eclectic is what they used to call it in school was sort of like frowned upon. At least I went to Marquette back in the day, and that was the vibe I got, was like, I'm neurodivergent. Right. I'm neurodivergent, undiagnosed at that point. But like eclectic sounded really great. And they're like, but this is, sloppy therapy. And I think right there, I've been in the field for 15 years now. Like, there isn't a modality that works for everyone. There isn't even a singular modality that works for a singular person for all of the therapy. Most of the time you're trying different things and showing up in different ways to be helpful to people.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think if you're too rigid in one thing too, it like puts like that relationship in jeopardy. And I think that's the most important thing. You have to be comfortable with who you're talking to, and someone has to be able to adjust out of that, or adjust out of a modality to kind of meet the individual needs.
Yeah. What is your experience with working with trauma, like that flexibility between having a formula or having a plan can be really safe for people, and sort of the like take it as it pops up, take it as it comes sort of approach?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think about like treatment plans I put together, and they, coming from like a healthcare system where like you just found the things to put in, like the things to plug into a formula or like equation for a treatment plan for anxiety. I try to keep things so general, but like specific. This sounds totally like it doesn't go together, right? But like in a general idea of like, if you were feeling better, if you were feeling like you were getting what you needed out of therapy, what would be different? And that's kind of where we're aiming towards. So that's what I kind of put as a treatment goal. And then finding like, what's the path for you to get there? I believe, similar to like the EMDR dynamic, the being able to know that your brain's trying to heal itself. It's trying to kind of be on its own journey into healing. And I'm just kind of helping to facilitate that. So I don't like to be too rigid in what needs to happen, because I don't freaking know, I just know what we can do with what's coming up in your brain to help you get to that kind of goal or that target that you're shooting for. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm biased, right? Because that's also where I've landed after some time in the field.
Okay.
But yeah, that like we're facilitators, we're helpers. Like, I don't say this out loud in therapy, but my thought process is always sort of like, here's what I think, but who the fuck am I? Like, and again, I don't say that doesn't give people, I think, a lot of trust in their therapist, but sort of this like hypothesis approach, or like I'm holding these ideas gently. I have a lot of information from the psych world. I have a lot of research in my brain. I have a lot of experience with other clients. And so it is this sort of like tentative, I'm curious about this. Let's see about this. Let's play with this. Let's test this. Let's gather more information and see where we're at. And I think that feels more realistic and also safer for a lot of folks.
Yeah. What in your experience got you there, or like got you to transition away from what you learned traditionally about treatment plans?
Yeah, I think pretty early on, coming out of grad school, I knew how to do an intake and a second session really well. And then the third session was kind of like, uh-oh, now what? They're not better yet. And I think having some of those experiences, having the clients who made the most progress, just where I was curious and wasn't trying to do techniques or modalities or be real formulaic, the people who improved with my help, who I could facilitate the most were just people I was curious with and sort of showed up as a person who wanted to be helpful but didn't know what that looked like. I will say Harlene Anderson's book, Conversation, Language, and Possibility, probably saved me from dropping out of the field, because at the time that I was at Marquette, and I don't know what Marquette's at now, so I try not to throw too much shade, but 15 years ago, Marquette was real heavy on evidence-based practice, as in insurance will reimburse you for doing CBT, so do CBT. And so, I found this textbook that was real postmodern and therapist as a helper, not as an expert. And like that just really landed well for me. And then I did a lot of couples therapy. So it was the licensed marriage and family therapy part of my approach. It's just couples are not following a script in therapy. There's a lot more movement, and it's a dynamic process in the room, as opposed to follow your treatment plan to a T. So you just sort of have to deal with what comes up in real time and process it in real time. And like, that's useful. That's beneficial.
Yeah, that's cool. I feel like similar, just like having that experience to kind of figure out what it is. Cause I think, maybe it's, at least for me, like the anxiety of coming out of grad school is like, oh, I want to do this right. Like, I don't quite know, like, there's got to be a way to do it. And like, I'm also in a similar generation. I think I'm 13 years out, or I don't know, 11, something like that. I don't know. What's math?
A decade plus.
Yes, a decade plus. But it was heavy in some of that. And I think it offered some comfort in like, oh, there's a right way to do therapy. Like there's a right way, there's a thing to do, and now it's like, I don't know, sometimes I'll be like even working with like students who are in counseling educator programs. They're like, well, what's the plan here? I'm like, I don't know if you're gonna like the answer to this. Like, it's a loose plan. It's a direction more. But yeah.
And I have all these mantras, cliches. I don't think of them as cliches, but I have a lot of mantras of like process oriented as opposed to goal oriented, or more like, I don't talk about finish lines very often. I talk about what progress looks like. And again, it updates. I think sometimes that can lead to crisis of the week, which I'm aware of and try to keep us from falling into, because I do think that can be unhelpful. When I hear when people come and see me and they've had the same therapist for 8 years and they just kind of go in and chit chat, like, oh, well, that's not therapy. So yeah, it's like you said, there's a direction, there's a loose plan for movement,
right?
And we'll like fill in the details as we go, as opposed to having the details and needing to go step by step through them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's so interesting when you were talking about that, like clients who go on with like the fire of the week. I was just talking with somebody about like thinking about therapists as different kinds of like gardeners. Like there's like therapists who kind of just like spray the flowers. I think of them as like the impatient therapists who are just like, let's just keep you living, and then like people who are kind of just like tending the flowers, or taking some of the, I don't know, the leaves off or pruning or whatever. And then I feel like really over time, like I'm like a flipping like gardener, like I'm like in the dirt, like rooting things out and things like that too. And I feel like that's therapy. And I think it's intimidating to some folks to kind of step into that kind of work. But I think that's where real kind of rooted change happens. And I think that's what I always look for in folks that I network with and other therapists that I'm connected to, because I think that's how we get there.
Yeah, for sure. I use a lot of gardening metaphors because there's seasons, there's growing, there's maintenance, there's planting, there's digging the old weeds out and rocks, and looking at all that stuff, seeing what we want to do with it. So yeah, that's a rich metaphor in a lot of ways. What's sort of the niche area, the clientele you like to work with? What's the population that you feel like you vibe with at this point in your career?
Yeah, so my practice really focuses on women and teens with trauma and grief. So like I talked about, I have a lot of trauma background, and I kind of just view everyone from that trauma lens. And I really like listening to people's experiences and getting to know why people are the way that they are and what's kind of shaped them, and helping them grow into, however they want to grow with their trauma, which I think is neat. It's neat to witness. Had like a personal experience with grief too. So I feel like that kind of threw me into the world of that. And I feel like it lends itself to, I don't know, when you've gone through something, right? Like it's easier to say like, okay, well, it's not going to be okay, right? Like shit happens and that really sucks. And I can sit here with that. So that's kind of been my general niche over time. It's developed into, I've gotten my perinatal certificate. After I had like a really complicated pregnancy, I just became aware of how uninformed the whole OB world is in the realm of just trauma-informed care, and how like very small things could probably make huge adjustments for people who are birthing. Like a simple question in recovery of like, what was your pregnancy like? What was your birthing experience like from a nurse in recovery or a social worker in recovery? That I think would be huge. Just to have that compassionate care, because it is such a complex health dynamic that your body's going through. And I don't think there's necessarily the emotional support to go through that entire experience of, even like for most women, what is it to gain 50 pounds in a matter of 9 months? And then, for a year or years after to see the changes that your body happens. I think there's a lot of conversation around like, well, it's a beautiful experience, but like, okay, but there's a lot of change that happens too, and from a trauma lens, right? Some of that change in your body can be reminders of a traumatic experience too, which I think is an important thing to kind of be aware of as well. Prior to all of the perinatal certificate, like a part of my EMDR work was also focusing on like women's health, which included like pelvic floor support for like sexual abuse or even like anxiety symptoms. So that really kind of feels like it kind of seamlessly kind of moved into this like postpartum birth trauma, complicated pregnancy dynamic too, especially when I can use EMDR or other kind of somatic modalities to help people process whatever their body is kind of like not over yet or not worked through.
Yeah. And just, I think setting that idea that like there's not a specific timeline that people need to be on.
Yeah.
And I think that goes against the medical model in a lot of ways, that has this sort of textbook approach of like, if you just do this, your body will respond this way, with not a lot of nuance that people's bodies respond in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that's the piece of it too. Like, I think, pelvic floor PT is amazing. I think that, that should be like kind of prescribed to most women or birthing people postpartum. But in general, right, it's like, well, if you do these things, it should get better. And like, even for like women with some sexual dysfunction, like sometimes there's been no trauma, sometimes it's anxiety and there's so much tension that's held that it creates pain. And there's not a lot of conversations with that, at least that I know of happening, in the medical realm of things, right? Everything has to kind of have a physical cause, or it's just kind of lumped into like, well, that's anxiety and you're kind of just stuck, with that kind of somatic symptom. And maybe, right? Maybe, but I'm always curious to see what can happen with the body when whatever's needs to be processed is able to kind of process through the body.
Yeah. And I think our understanding of how trauma works and where it resides has shifted a lot in the field as well, which has been a good thing.
For sure.
Yeah. How do you take care of yourself while you're doing this work?
That's a great question. I'm like in a season where we're like renovating our kitchen and doing other stuff. So I'm like, not much right now, honestly. But in general, I think it's time in nature. I really like being outside. I really like going for hikes. I like a hard hike too. I also run. So typically I'm getting back into it because now I'm coming out of the season of like having kids and whatnot. But I usually will run like a half marathon a year. So I did a half marathon at Mount Rainier in July of this year.
Nice.
And I always love those types of races and experiences because I feel like it's such like a spiritual experience for me too. It's like this thing that just helps me process, which I think is probably some of the, like the bilateral stimulation of just running for a really long time. But also like build my confidence and like look what my body can do, but also like helps me connect, to loss that I've had. So it's always kind of this like amazing thing that I just feel like is so rejuvenating in that way. I'm also really fortunate to have some good friends too, who I feel like are not my therapists, but are people who I could talk about, like, I don't know, butthole with or something like that, and they'd be like down for that. So I think just having those good connections too really helps. I used to cook more. I haven't cooked in a while. And reading, I'm like a big reader. I love that. Yeah.
What's the current state, because it shifts and adjusts? So current balancing act you have for private practice owner, mom, taking care of yourself as a human individual. Like, what have you learned about that process as, having kids and hiring a new therapist, and like some of the changes that happen in your practice professionally, and then some of the changes that happen in your life personally?
Yeah. I mean, that's that I'm real, like that I'm an actual person. And like, I think one of the things that I learned earlier that I'm really applying to myself right now is that like coping is hard. It's a lot of work to continually be engaging in self-care. Like it's exhausting for people. It's exhausting for me from time to time. And I'm pretty real with that with my clients too. If I'm figuring out as we go too. I know we're just coming out of an election too, so that has been a thing on top of there. But in general, I think it's like finding pockets of it. And even if I can't find, like, even if I don't have time to run a half marathon right now, right? It's maintaining a good balance for me. I only do client work 2 days a week. I have 2 days off where I'm just with my kids. And then I have a day where it's kind of like a little bit of both. So it's really kind of like really securing in time that I have in my different roles that has been really helpful for me. And then when I'm in those roles, I'm like in those roles. So like when I'm working, like my partner is in charge of like any phone calls for the kids, things like that. When I'm with the kids, we're doing stuff. Like we go to the zoo, we go to the library, we're like regulars there. Miss Maria and Tosa is like the bomb, right? Like we are on top of just like really like living life and experiencing things together. So I think that has helped to kind of really just kind of section out the different parts of my life. And then I think it's kind of right now it's a little, I know I just took on a new clinician, Holly Sackett. She's like phenomenal too. She's going to be, she's available now, but she's doing work. She's certified in grief. So she's right in the practice. She's in the right spot. And her whole lens is trauma. She does some couples work as well. And she has her substance abuse license too. So she's really going to be focusing on helping and supporting folks who have a loved one with a substance abuse and just the trauma and grief that can come with that, which I think is going to be really, really powerful, because I think that comes into a lot of different dynamics that I have from childhood trauma and things like that I see in my practice often. So she's going to be a really valuable asset. She's got a huge interest in like somatic work as well, which I think is so, so cool. So I'm just really jazzed to be able to kind of offer that. But again, it's that balancing act of being able to support her while I'm supporting the business, while I'm supporting my family, all these different things. But I think some of this is also the role of a lot of people, especially in private practice, like you have kids too. So, you know, how do you kind of balance that for yourself too?
Yeah, I think it's a continual work in progress. Like both my kids are in school now, and that seems easier in a way, but they're not at the same school, which will get easier hopefully next year. So I think, just some of those things of looking at like this aspect of it is manageable for now, and it is for now, and we'll adjust. And how do we gather resources, and how do we sort of check in? I agree with you. I try and do it similarly, where when I'm in a role, I'm actually in that role. So when I'm doing therapy, like that's where I'm at. When I'm home, I'm trying to, do bedtime stories and those types of things, so that like it's, I don't know, right, living that experiential life. I think so many therapists who work with trauma end up leaning towards those like grounding experiences, those experiential based things, and those body based things. So like you mentioned it, and your other clinician working with it, like these somatic experiences, like I think when we're working with trauma, it just sort of becomes ingrained in what we do, and it's the water we swim in, to be like, hey, like, how's your system? What's going on for your regulation? And when we do that all day with clients, it's hard to not be aware of that in our own process.
For sure. For sure. I think it's like, it's not perfect though. I think that's the big thing. I try to take that like illusion away from therapists. Like, we're all figuring it out as we go, but we're trying our best. And like what you said too, like everything's kind of a season. And it's kind of figuring out like, what's the coping for this season. And, once our kitchen project is done, right, it'll be the next season of being able to kind of lean into other things, but also that like awareness of like, okay, my body is not okay, and one thing my healthcare, my experience working in healthcare has taught me is like when my body is like not okay from stress, which I don't think that's a good thing, but at least I have that knowledge now of like, okay, I know if I get like tightness in my chest, or if I feel like I can't like take a deep breath, I can't get all the way down into my lungs, like something needs to shift. Like I need a night for myself. I need to lean into some yoga. I need to have a bath. I need to kind of do the things just to kind of re-regulate my body. Like I would if I feel like I'm coming down with a cold.
Right. Yeah. And I make that analogy for folks a lot too. Like when you're stressed to a certain degree, like it is, it's like having the flu. Like we take off and we move into rest and recovery, and we hydrate and we cozy up and we have our comfort foods of chicken noodle soup or whatever that looks like. And like, that's what's going on in your body too. It's just a different part of your body that is bearing the symptoms, but like a continual stress, chronic stress, like that's where it's at. I think, the election cycle is one of those things where so many people are culturally having a shared experience that's draining in a lot of ways. And so like, how do we do grounding from there? How do we sort of build community and connect, but also like take care of ourselves before we try to take care of everyone else?
Yeah, for sure. How's the last week or two been for you with the election cycle as a therapist? I feel like I see all these funny memes of therapists right now.
Yeah, I think, some of my clients, we spend most of the session, if not all of the session on it. One of my clients kind of chuckled and he was just like, oh, condolences about that. And then like we moved on, and like it was a nice acknowledgement, but like their life is still going on and that's what they wanted to talk about. So, I think it's been some of those cultural experiences where it is not just, clients come in and talk about their lives. Like this is what's going on with their kids, with their partner, with their job stress, whatever. And like, it's weird. We don't have all of that many cultural experiences where most of your clients are coming in with a similar experience.
Right.
So I think that's the big shift for me anyway. This past couple of weeks has been like, oh, I'm having the same conversation over and over again, which isn't bad or wrong or anything. It's just different because usually we don't have these things that are culturally relevant. I might have a client who's super into the Olympics. I might have a client who's super into Game of Thrones. I might they're different people doing different things. And this is one of those experiences that I think is hitting most people.
Yeah, for sure. And hitting in. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say not most people, because a third of the voting population didn't vote. So some people out there are just
some people don't care.
Right.
Right. Yeah. No, it's been an interesting dynamic. I actually feel like, I don't know, 2016 was a different experience. I feel like it was way, like the days after that were just like, I don't even know. Like I remember them from like my own response and reaction, but also just like how present that was in mine. And I've been kind of surprised that it's been like, for some people it's been the whole session, but for some people it's something where it's like, well, here's this thing and that's what's happening. And I have this other thing that we're really in the midst of processing and we can't take too far away from it. Or from like a systemic perspective, here's how that's kind of fueling kind of all of this too. And it's a little more activating this week as well. So it's been interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just a lot of people like stayed up really late for the election, and like, we have new research that suggests like our brain's still dealing with our sleep patterns from like 2 weeks ago. Not just how much sleep did you get last night, but like how much has your body been able to rest and recover over the past sort of trend of time. And so, I think just broadening that vision on like how we look at that. It's not just, in the past 24 hours, how's your health and well-being been? But like, how have the past couple of weeks been? Because there's a cumulative nature to some of this. We had such a good landing point, and now you're frozen again.
To like, I know, am I good now?
You're good.
Okay. But yeah, I think one of the things that I did get from our cat that I thought was really important was kind of this like social justice realm of things. So I think I've just been, touched by the indirect message that the election has kind of sent to a lot of folks, especially in like the trauma realm of things and what they're working through. So I think that's been kind of a complexity of this election cycle. That I think has been something that I don't feel like has been as present in previous years as well, but it's like adding a layer.
Yeah. Well, and I work with religious trauma. So like the Christo-fascist side of things is very triggering for people who grew up in cult-like surroundings or grew up in, Christian nationalism or, fundamentalist religions in some form or fashion. So a lot of space and grace right now, as like I think people are just highly triggered, and it's that complex PTSD. It's not just here's the trigger. It's sort of like in the air there's a bunch of triggers. We're not going to tease out which thing triggered what, but like we're just going to work on soothing the system, and when we amp up, which is going to happen, how do we sort of come back down?
Yeah, I love that you offer that. I think that's such a invaluable resource to have in the community for working through that religious trauma piece.
Yeah. Not super popular in the Midwest still. I think people need it, but like I think just culturally it's still the default.
Yes, for sure.
Tracy, if people want to learn more about your work or what you're doing, or they want to work with you, how do they find you? Where do they go?
Yeah, so they can come to the website. The website's Firefly Counseling, MKE.com. And I know I'm on Instagram as well. I am not great at social media, so it gets updated when there's things to be updated about, but otherwise it gets cast aside. But I believe the handle is Firefly Counseling MKE for that on Instagram and Facebook as well. I know Polly's currently accepting new clients. She's the new clinician. Her bio is up on the website, so people can check her out there. She's accepting clients, and she's taking 15-minute consults so people can meet a little bit beforehand to really see if it's a good fit before they're kind of leaning into therapy. Same for me. I have the 15-minute consult. I think that's an important part of the therapy dynamic.
For sure.
So that's all available through the website. I do like online scheduling to make it as easy as possible, because that's what I appreciate when I'm in the seat of being the client.
As a millennial, just text me. I don't want to talk on the phone.
Right. I don't know what that is, but that's a thing.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. All right, Tracy, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and chat.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
And to all our wonderful listeners, thanks for tuning in again this week. We'll be back next week with another new episode. Take care, everyone.